We are on and we are recording, and I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves now, please. I'll give you a very quick introduction. I'm Moshe Silver. I'm very pleased that you're all joining me here and all joining us here this evening for the introduction of my new book, The Weight of Gold, which a number of you have already purchased. Thank you. It's available here in Jerusalem at Adarabba Books and at Pomerantz Books, which are two of the city's most important bookstores. It's available on Amazon. There's a link that I posted in the chat. I also posted an email address to contact me directly. Needless to say, I also have some books for sale. And I'd like to clean out this corner of my office, which has a stack of almost 500 copies of the book in it. So anybody who wants to stop by, I'm more than happy to do direct sales at my doorstep. What we're going to do this evening is I'm going to speak very briefly about myself. I'm going to talk about how this book came into existence. I'm going to speak a little bit about the general concept of the book, and then I'm going to read and present the note on this week's Torah portion, after which there's one of the team who's here this evening, Mr. Darius Dale. I'm going to ask him to speak a little bit about our experience together and how this book came to be. And then we're going to open this up for discussion, question, answer, comment, and so on and so forth. The whole thing should take us about an hour. And again, thank you very much for joining us. And so here we go. Most of you know me and my wife, Risa. We came here in May of 2018. And thank God we live here in Jerusalem, which is something that not everybody can say. And we don't take it lightly. There is very, very much that goes into this, that went into this decision for us, and that day by day, every day continues to build layers and layers and layers of meaning. And I think also of obligation for us. When we talk about the Jews being the chosen people, we understand that it doesn't mean that we were chosen to get special gifts. It means that we were chosen to have special responsibilities and special obligations towards each other and towards the world and towards the greater society, not merely towards people that we already get along with, and not merely towards our fellow Jews, but it's our obligation to, as the rabbis teach us, bring God into this world in every way, every day, and in every one of our actions. And it's an ongoing challenge. And personally, I consider it a blessing as well. So not too long after we got here, one of my business associates, whom you'll meet later, went through a very difficult personal time. And me being here and him being in New York City, there were limits to what we could do, to how we could interact around what he was going through. I was on the phone with him a lot, and I think we had a lot of very, very, very meaningful conversations. And I certainly saw a tremendous depth and an honesty and a willingness, a dedication to a lifetime of working to continue to improve himself, which is something that I'm very impressed by in anybody, and something I don't take lightly. And at a certain point, I asked him if there was anything else that I could do beyond just having conversations with him to help to be useful. To me, that's one of the most important things that a human being can do, is be useful to other people. And his immediate answer was, he's a very devout Christian, reads the Bible every day. And he said, but I have no understanding of the Jewish view of the Old Testament, of how you understand biblical text. And it would be helpful if you could point out ways to me that the text.
Youngest.
Hi, mute yourself, please.
Thursday, that school is closed until further notice.
Dana Freundlich, mute yourself, please.
Other people.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello.
Welcome. Please mute yourself.
What was that?
Mute yourself, please.
Oh, okay. Let me see where.
Nobody's in school.
I know there's a button here for this somewhere.
Upper
Moshe, you can
right-hand
mute
corner.
people. You can mute people.
Or bottom left on the
Sure.
computer screen.
Moshe, you can mute everyone. Go to participants and mute everyone.
All right. I think I'm muted now.
Great idea.
Hello?
Hi.
No, you're not. You're not. The upper right-hand corner says mute. You push that button. The upper right-hand corner of your pic.
Okay, everybody's muted. Thank you. Except me. The feeling of power. And so, in order to really understand how we understand the Torah's text, I think the first thing that needs to be explained is how we approach the text. That it's a living document for us, a document that we revisit every day, every week, and every year in an annual cycle. And so I immediately started writing weekly notes to my friend, giving him a little bit of, if you will, the Jewish flavor of the text, but not trying to convince anybody to live a Jewish life per se, but rather, how does this book speak to all of humanity? Because if it doesn't speak to all of humanity, then it truly doesn't speak to anybody. Just as we were chosen, which is to say designated for a task, which is to bring God's message into the whole world and to make the whole world a better place, this book is a book for everybody. It's truly the user's manual for the human soul. And so what I tried to do was to make this book accessible in a way that really speaks to each person. To give an idea of what that's all about, the very first portion that we read is the opening section of the book of Genesis. And what I chose to focus on in my discussion of that Torah portion, that weekly Parashat, as we call it, is the one verse where God says, "Let us make a human being." And it's a striking text because God, is doing all this stuff, all by God's self. And all of a sudden, God speaks in the plural and says, "Naaseh Adam," let us make a human being. And the question arises, who is God speaking to? So the rabbinic commentators, Rashi says, who's the major of the rabbinic commentators that we follow, says, well, God turned to the heavenly host and elicited their opinion. And in the Midrash and the rabbinic sort of poetic interpretive text around this particular passage says that the angels said to God, you don't want to make a human being because the human being's going to sin. The human being's not going to listen to you. The human being's going to do all kinds of terrible stuff. And God says, you got a point. But the human being's not going to do all those things all the time. And besides, I already made up my mind. So thanks for your input, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. But that doesn't necessarily help us to get to the point of engaging deeply with the text. And to me, if we can't engage very deeply with the text on the most profound level, right off the bat from page 1, then we are going to, no matter what the title of the book is, whether it's called The Weight of Gold or the Torah or the Holy Bible, if we can't engage with it, we're going to lay it aside. And we're going to say, I can't get into it. And it struck me that when the text says, let us make a human being, it resonated to me like these, 18th and 19th century English novels, where all of a sudden in the middle of the page, you hear, now, dear reader, let us contemplate. Let us look at this person. Let us understand. And I think it's very useful to look at it this way, that the text is saying to the reader, Naaseh Adam, you, reader, and me, Torah, let's get together and let's create a protagonist. Let's create a central figure for this book. Let's create the human being for whom this book is created, for whom this book is written, and for whom this book is going to serve as a guide for life. Because if you don't relate to me right off the bat on page 1, you're not going to read page 2. And I got a lot of messages that I need to give you, so I need you to read beyond page 1. How do we create a focus, a central character, a protagonist that's meaningful to you, dear reader? And I believe that the Torah invites us over and over and over again to seek that kind of meaning, to seek a meaning of, on a human level, not per se on a Jewish level, not per se on a religious level, because my book is a book that tries to speak to the message of the Torah. It's Torah for people who don't believe in Torah. It's Torah for people who don't believe in religion. It's Torah for people who don't believe in God. And if you don't think that in all of those levels there's meaning to the book, please take a few minutes, read this book, I've spent the last almost 30 years teaching Torah in many different settings. And I like to flatter myself that among the students that have most responded to it are people who approach the text finding it most problematic, are people who've approached their Jewish way of life coming from places where they were told how they had to think, how they had to behave, and what meaning the text had to have for them, and they rebelled against that. And when I was able to speak with them about the more human level of the text, all of a sudden it opened up for them. And to me, that's a tremendous blessing. So with your permission, I would like to read the chapter that corresponds to the Torah portion that we just finished reading, which in Hebrew is called Parashat Yechi. It's the last portion of the book of Genesis, and it ends with the death of Joseph and sets the stage for the book of Exodus, which we, God willing, will begin reading in the synagogues this coming Shabbat, this coming Saturday morning, pandemic or no pandemic. Each chapter is headed with a little quote. Most of the quotes do not come from traditional Jewish sources. The quote heading this particular chapter is from a gentleman that some of you may be familiar with. His name is Bob Marley. And the quote is, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." This week's portion ends with the death of Joseph and closes the book of Genesis. The end of
When are you
Genesis,
gonna be home?
the end of the story.
Are you gonna bring the kids home?
Abraham.
Oh, okay, so I can go. I have to go.
Somebody's not muted here? How did that work? Okay, you're supposed to, thank you. Sorry. The end of the book of Genesis is the end of the story of the family of Abraham, sets the stage for the saga of the nation of his descendants. As was pointed out by my teacher, Rabbi David Silber, people ask why all these great stories in the book of Genesis keep on getting interrupted by genealogies, where what they really want is just to get on with the narrative and find out what happens next. But the whole point, as Rabbi Silber points out, is the book of Genesis is actually a list of genealogies, and it's illuminated and bound together by stories, thus forming a coherent narrative, which is not merely instructive in itself, but it's the key to what comes later. It's a psychological and spiritual DNA for us to understand all of the rest of the Bible that carries over, in fact, into the New Testament. Chapter 48 opens with Jacob on his deathbed, where Joseph has been called to his side. Joseph enters, bringing with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob makes a very dramatic admission. "When I came from Padan, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan on the road, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrat," which is Bethlehem. The expression "Rachel died on me," speaking of his wife Rachel, it's good colloquial English. In the biblical Hebrew, it really means, or it's more properly read as "Rachel died and it was on me." And I think what he's saying is, it was my fault. Remember that Jacob, after years of toiling for his father-in-law, packed up his family and ran away. His father-in-law, Laban, catches up with him and takes Jacob to task. And he rages. He says, "Jacob, you stole my gods." The gods are what's called the Teraphim, which are common household gods in the ancient Near East. Unbeknownst to Jacob, Rachel, Laban's daughter, made off with them. And Jacob shouts at Laban, "With whomever you find your gods, let that person not live," unwittingly calling for the death of his beloved wife, Rachel. The curse comes true when Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin. On his deathbed, Jacob unburdens himself, acknowledging to Joseph that he, Jacob, is to blame for the death of Joseph's mother. And this may also illuminate that particular bond between Jacob and his youngest son, Benjamin. Because last week, Judah told Joseph he dared not separate Benjamin from their father, as his soul is bound to his soul. Jacob's love for his youngest, for that son of his old age, is shot through with his guilt over Rachel's death. Now Jacob sees Joseph's two sons. And who are these? He asks. Jacob just told Joseph, Joseph's sons are to be considered Jacob's own. And now, a moment later, looking directly at the boys, Jacob can't remember who they are. It's a powerful and heartrending picture of the mind evanescing in old age. Joseph reminds his father who they are, and Jacob reaches out his hands to bless them. Now, Joseph positions his older son Manasseh on his left and Ephraim on his right, thus guiding them to Jacob's right and left hands, respectively. So Joseph intends the greater blessing, which is the one of the right hand, for his firstborn, Manasseh, but Jacob crosses his hands, puts his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left on Manasseh. Joseph objects, but Jacob says, no, he knew what he was doing. Joseph gave his sons names that are freighted with meaning. His firstborn is named Manasseh from the Hebrew root meaning forgetfulness, because, said Joseph, God made me forget all my hardship and my father's house. And Ephraim from the root meaning fruitful, because, said Joseph, God made me fruitful here in the land of my suffering. Jacob understands. He understands very well the names of Joseph's sons, and he grasps their message. And now, as Jacob acknowledges his own failures as a husband, as a parent, he teaches Joseph that we cannot undo our past. God does us no favors if God helps us to forget. Forgetfulness is for those who are too weak to face life. For the rest of us, no matter how dreadful or how difficult, no matter that it's a task we may never fully accomplish in our lifetime, we must face our past continually. We can thrust our past out of our mind over and over again, but like a hungry cat, it keeps coming back. It will find its way back, no matter how securely we bar the door against it. This one, says Jacob, Ephraim, the one who knows and acknowledges that his life comprises both triumph and suffering, this one shall be first. As Judah took on the role of leader, setting aside Reuben, the firstborn, Ephraim has the capacity to lead. Manasseh, although he was born first, still has work to do. His body was born and raised in Egypt, but his soul still agonizes in resentment over fragmented memories of a land he has never seen, wallowing in a past that's not even his own and from which he nonetheless cannot free himself. Jacob now is about to gather all his sons together and bless them each. Unlike the prior generations where the blessing and the covenant passed on to one son only, each of Jacob's sons will inherit. Each one will bear the continuity of the family and of the blessing and covenant of Abraham. The Torah is now establishing a clear program of societal structure based not on equality, but on equitableness. To call people equal risks invoking a false assumption of equivalence. People are not the same. And from the Torah's perspective, we cannot be the same because God creates each of us for a unique purpose. Jacob knows some of his sons are smarter than the others, some are stronger, some are more prone to violence, and some are more devious. No matter, each one has a role to play, as we each play our role best when we learn to play together, supporting and assisting, correcting and criticizing, and sometimes even opposing one another. But the greatest actor in the world cannot play Hamlet with no one else on the stage. This then is Jacob's final lesson to Joseph. Jacob's admission about Rachel's death frees Joseph from the last bits of unresolved resentment over his own past. Jacob's lesson about embracing our past with all its pains and all its troubles propels Joseph forward to fully accomplishing his task as leader of the family that will, in the book of Exodus, become a nation. It's fascinating to note that God never speaks to Joseph. God has spoken to all the male protagonists in the Torah from Adam through Jacob and even to some of the women. And now, when the family is in danger of being dispersed, of never returning to the land of God's promise, God's out of the picture. We need to learn to do for ourselves. And that was ultimately the success of Jacob, his doing for himself, even though God helped. And is certainly the message of Joseph's whole existence. Before we close the book of Genesis, allow me to look at what must be the single most poignant verse in the entire Torah. Immediately before blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, Jacob says to Joseph, I did not pray that I would see your face. And behold, now God has even shown me your children. In Hebrew, Ra'o fanecha lo filalti. I did not pray that I would see your face. This is translated and is always interpreted to mean that Jacob had despaired of ever seeing Joseph again. After Joseph disappeared, Jacob gave up hope. But I don't think that's an accurate reading of the text. I believe the deeper meaning, the true meaning, is a straight literal reading. I did not pray to see your face. When Jacob marries Leah, she immediately goes into a frenzy of childbearing. But Jacob's beloved, her sister Rachel, is having difficulty conceiving. After Leah gives birth to her fourth son, Rachel approaches Jacob and begs, "Give me children," she says. "If not, I am dead." Jacob flies into a rage. "Am I in God's place? God who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb?" It's a shocking response from a man who loved her at first sight. This is in harsh contrast to Jacob's own father. When Isaac married Rebekah, he saw that she was having difficulty conceiving. Unasked, Isaac prayed fervently to God for Rebekah to conceive. His prayer was answered, and the result was the twins, Esau and Yaakov, Esau and Jacob. Jacob, the son who came into this world as a result of prayer. And yet, when his beloved wife begs him to pray on her behalf, he not only refuses to pray, he attacks her and berates her. "I have 4 sons already," Jacob says. "If you can't have children, that's your problem." How dramatically our feelings shift when we have to deal with the pressures of day-to-day life. We marry for love, then we have to figure out how to earn a living. We marry for romance, but then we have to deal with our spouse's fears and with their all too human weaknesses, which highlight our own. "I did not pray to see your face," Jacob admits to Joseph. "I did not pray for you to be born, not as my father prayed for me, and yet you came into this world. Not only did you come, but you have sons of your own, and now they stand before me." Jacob is overwhelmed by God's unwarranted generosity, by this staggering show of grace. At the end of Jacob's days, his life comes together. However brief his happiness, it is complete. Jacob is able to recognize and acknowledge and unburden himself of his own guilt, and to acknowledge the abundance of God's graciousness to him personally and to his family. And in so doing, at the last, he teaches his son Joseph how to be a man in the world. May God grant us the wisdom not just to learn these lessons, but to feel how urgent they are. Let us not wait until our last hour. There is much at stake. Okay, I think I am. Did I just unmute everybody? Maybe not. Nope. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right. Thank you. I would like to invite Darius, who I see has joined us, to introduce himself and say a few words. Please give your attention to Darius Dale.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Darius Dale with the character in the mist, I guess, if you will, with whom this book was written. I did all of the, I guess, the hard work, if you will, of being the idiot that needed Moshe's spiritual guidance. No, I just want to start and say it's a real blessing to be here with you guys. I know we're all over the world, and it has been obviously a really tough time for a lot of people, and it's a real blessing that we can be united, with the love of each other and with the love of God and the blessings of God. I think this is obviously a very powerful book. It's very powerful for myself. Just a little bit of background on myself and sort of how I came to work with Moshe. So I'm a colleague of Moshe's, or I've been working at this firm, Hedge Iris Management, for my entire adult life. And so Moshe was our now retired chief operating officer, and has always been sort of the rabbi, the spiritual leader of our firm, if you will. In about almost 3 years ago now, I found myself in a very kind of difficult time. It really wasn't a difficult time from the perspective of, sort of the personal and professional success that I had been blessed with. I was sort of at the peak from those perspectives, but I was finding myself at a very difficult time of actually handling a lot of that success. I think, as alluded to in the book, I grew up very poor, grew up in a very abusive household. My stepfather was very physically and emotionally abusive to my mother, my brother, and I for a really long period of time. And that stuck with me. And a lot of those, I guess, a lot of that negativity is really, really kind of balled up inside of me for so long. And I really struggled with anger management for really most of my life. It's something that I've been able to achieve personal and professional success in spite of this, really struggling with this, this how to deal with my own emotions. Fast forward to, I want to say, May of 2018, I found myself in a very public setting of unleashing a lot of that negativity. And fortunately, I think at the time I would have said, unfortunately, this was recorded and shared with my firm. And now looking back, obviously, nearly 3 years later, I'm extremely fortunate that it was recorded. I'm extremely fortunate that that it happened, because otherwise, this journey, the spiritual journey that I've been, kind of embarked on with Moshe for the past few years, and really and developed a real lifelong personal friend, a true spiritual leader, truly one of my best friends. It's all been a function of that. They say the Lord works in mysterious ways, and I think this is just one of those ways in which, he needed me to confront a lot of these demons through the lens of the Torah, through the lens of developing a relationship with someone who has been through it all and has seen a lot, for me to mature. So really, this this book is really written, in my opinion, in terms of I haven't gone through that process with Moshe for so long. It's really written with the idea and intent that the characters in the Bible and the Torah are very similar to us, in that they have their flaws. They're called upon to do great things that are well in excess of what they themselves bestow upon themselves in terms of their potential. And I think Moshe saw a level of potential in me that was well in excess of what I could ever even possibly see in myself. I've always fashioned myself someone, again, who's been, really good at pretty much most of the things I've tried to do. But the one thing I've been very poor at is actually dealing with anger management issues, of dealing with how to best interpersonally relate to people. I've always struggled with those things, and it's no secret why. I mean, you spend a childhood of in a home, and in and out of homeless shelters, that, with abusive father, you'll quickly pick up the tools of the trade. But the reality is, I needed to finally see other people go through these same struggles and accomplish great things. I didn't really believe it in myself. I didn't understand that. I always thought that I could mask my weaknesses by building up my strengths. What I learned in this process really was to attack those weaknesses with the same spirit and the same fervor, and the same willingness to fail. Obviously, it hasn't been a linear straight line of me becoming a more mature individual and a better person, and and having a better impact on society, if you will. But it's obviously going in the right direction. And really, I just want to thank you, Moshe, for your blessing. I want to thank you for me allowing me to be this weight in your life, because I know you didn't take it lightly. And I know you want to get this work out to the world, because really, truly, there's so many other people just like me, and really just like many of you, who have their own personal struggles to deal with, and that could really use this kind of guidance to get to the promised land, if you will. So I just want to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius, and God bless. And just a couple of quick points. So you talked about the weight. Let me just briefly tell you where the title of the book comes from. There are one or two people on the call I know who already get it. There you go. There's a great song by the Grateful Dead. There are many great songs by the Grateful Dead. But early on in the process, as Darius and I started to speak, and I started writing these weekly notes to him, I became aware of what a tremendous blessing this is to me. And as I said at the beginning, if we are a chosen people, we're chosen for responsibility. And the responsibility that I was being offered and that I chose to take on, of helping to care for another person's another human being's soul, was a tremendous burden, but a very precious one. And as the line in the song says, I don't know, but I was told it's hard to run with the weight of gold. On the other hand, I heard it said it's also hard when the weight is lead. This is not a leaden weight. The obligation, the responsibility that we each have for the souls of everybody with whom we come in contact with. It's a very precious and a very urgent obligation, and I'm very blessed to take it on. And writing this book changed my life completely. I just want to, before I open it up for a question and discussion, I just want to acknowledge a few people who I see here on the call. Thank you, all of you, really, for joining us. And I don't mean to slight anybody by not mentioning you, but I see Rav Dov Elkins and Maxine, who are acknowledged in the acknowledgements. Rav Dov had played a big part in helping me to develop as a teacher of Torah, and they're very dear friends and very blessed by their friendship. And when the Seger is over, I plan to make my pilgrimage over to your building and deliver a copy of the book for you. I want to thank and acknowledge Benji Singer, who is here, who puts out a really important daily online newsletter that goes out to the whole English-speaking population here in Israel. And if you're not aware of and familiar with Israel B, please look it up online and sign up for it. It's free and it's very worthwhile.
IsraelB.org. The website is IsraelB.org, so you can subscribe on the website.
Israelb.org. Thank you. Okay. And I'm delighted and very blessed to see everybody here. So thank you again for joining in. Please, so let's and of course Marion Kunstenar, who is here, who is in addition to being a remarkable person and a dear friend, is also a very talented artist who very generously offered one of her recent paintings as the cover art for the book. She's there. If you look around, you'll see Marion sitting there, and she's got a bunch of pictures on the wall behind her. Her paintings are for sale. Shameless plug. And again, the book is available on Amazon, and the link for that is available in the chat. And I can be reached on my email at tikkun.olam@hotmail.com. That's also in the chat. And I'd like to open it up for comments, questions, discussion.
Moshe, you should put it on the chat again because it's disappeared for those of us who tuned in later than when you put it on.
Okay, thank you. Do that again now. Here's the link. So the book is, as I said, it's available. It is available here in 2 bookstores in Jerusalem, Adrabah Books and Pomerantz Books, and available also directly from me. All profits from the sale of this book will be going to charity. Halavai, it should be an issue. My biggest problem should be that we sell millions of copies of this book, because the most important thing is to get the message out. And I cannot, it's my own personal approach to Torah learning and teaching. I cannot take money for it. God willing, my message will reach many, many people, and many other people will benefit from the flow, from the endless flow of revenues that will come in from the sales of this book, that will go to a number of very important charities that are really doing very, very critical work here in Jerusalem. Do we have any questions, any comments? You can unmute yourself and holler. Rebbitzin.
Moshe,
Right.
no question, just Bahatzlacha Mazal Tov on your first book.
Thank you.
We're so thrilled and ecstatic for you, and just wish you all kinds of blessings with it. It should be a great success, and we cherish your friendship as well, and Riza.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moshe?
Yes. Hi, Ben. Hi.
Hi. It's really, it was a pleasure to hear this. And, but as I was listening to the general description and some of the passages, What struck me was sort of a resonance or an echo of the message that I had that had been conveyed by a professor of mine at Queens College in my BA in biblical philosophy, Professor, actually Rabbi Dr. Dean Ernest Schwartz. I don't know if it means anything. It does? Okay, great. Anyway, he said, the Bible is not a book about God. The Bible is a book about man. So it just sort of, touched that chord as you were describing it.
No, thank you. I think, part of my response and part of my whole approach to teaching Torah and to living my life for that matter is that many of the biggest problems that we face arise from people being told having it beaten into them over and over again that you must believe a certain thing, you must think a certain way, you must behave a certain way, and you must enforce that upon others. And if you don't do all of the above, there's something wrong with you. Organized religion has a lot to answer for. It offers a lot too. As Rabbi Cook, who was the chief rabbi of mandatory Palestine at the time before the founding of the state of Israel, was a great thinker, and one of his great observations, he said that organized religion arises from the individual's spiritual needs, and it's built around the spiritual needs of each individual. But you shouldn't make the mistake of believing that the purpose of organized religion is for you to find spiritual fulfillment. So there's a tension in, for those of us who do try to live, and I'm not criticizing or supporting one side or the other. It's not for everybody, but for those of us who do try to live religiously observant lifestyle, and at the same time to be true to that obligation to work on improving ourselves and work on improving the world and work on helping other people. And you don't help other people by telling them what to believe. Somebody comes to you and says, I'm hungry. You don't say to them, well, did you go to shul this morning? When somebody comes to you and says that they have, that they're going through a personal crisis, you don't tell them what text they should read. We need to be able to be there for each other, and it's a big challenge.
Yeah, but hopefully the foundation of Judaism, or I assume, the other religions, are that it is a pathway to spirituality.
Well, it's fraught. It's not simple and straightforward because human beings, we're not simple, straightforward structures. It's a big. We can have a whole nother 6-hour session on talking about this. But when God creates the first act of creation, the world of space, time, and motion comes into being, and nothing happens simultaneously anymore. And the rabbis tell us one of the big differences between our world and God is that in God there is no time, because everything is always is there eternally, something that we can't grasp. For us, things happen in sequence. And so because of sequence, we have choice, and because of choice, there's always something that we didn't do. And there's always something that we prefer to do over something else. And when our choice clashes with somebody else's choice, that leads to conflict. And conflict, because we're also emotional beings, leads to things like anger, and leads to things like disappointment, and leads to things like abandonment, and leads to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, the lessons are all there, but the first lesson is, who am I? And fundamentally, if I'm a human being, and I recognize that fundamentally you are also a human being, then there's something that I need to be able to, at a certain point, set everything else aside to relate to you on the human level. And once I can start to do that, then, with God's help, maybe I can do something better for us both.
Just to add, Rabbi Sachs always said, and Rabbi Sachs is Divrei Torah, especially on Sefer Bereshis, he talks about, if there's one word that defines Sefer Bereshis, it's a book about man taking responsibility. And whenever he tried to understand the Midrashim in Bereshis, he drew them to, there's always an ethical and moral message, because the underpinning message is man, despite the fact he's a godly being and Hashem speaks to man in Sefer Bereshis, that's not enough. He has to still maintain his own individuality and accountability and behave in a responsible way. So I think it's the duality. It's not, you can't say that the Bereshit isn't about God. It's all about God. God commands Avram. God commands, he appears to the Avot. That's what it's all about. But man still, despite that, has to maintain his individuality and accountability and behave responsibly, even though he's a godly being. It's the tension between both. It's that tension.
Yeah.
You agree with that, Moshe? So.
How can I disagree with Rabbi Sachs?
No, but the idea he's trying to say, it's the.
Yes, I mean, that's the complexity, and again, thank you, Reggie, because I think that's Ben, that goes like to your point of religion is a path to spiritual fulfillment.
Ideally.
But the problem is that the organized part of organized religion comes to dominate because we're human beings. And so it's easier to do the organized part than it is to do the spiritual part. And it's because we have to get through the day, we have to get through our lives. And so it's easier to just check off the list. I did the behaviors and don't bother me. And we see that not only in religion, we see that in so many aspects of our day-to-day life, that people go through the motions. And then at a certain point, when they have to confront themselves in a moment of crisis, sometimes they come up empty. One of my very, very dear friends, a very, very important teacher who's here with us today, thank God, Rabbi Shmuley Green, made an observation. We were together in a Shiva home. He came to visit when my wife was sitting Shiva for her mother. And at one point he said, all the crazy stuff that we do every day and every week and every season and every year, it's all training for this moment. And I think it's a very, very important observation, because if we take the organized part of organized religion as constant training, in a sense, we're always training, but in a certain sense, it's also always game day. And when you're sitting Shiva, when you lose a loved one, there's nothing that's more game day than that. That's when you have to get out there on the field and execute, and you can't get it wrong. You can't come in and say, oh, you know what? Let me replay that. And so our religion has, and our Torah has tremendous wisdom and tremendous lessons to teach us about what it means to be a human being, and about what it means to care for ourselves and for others, and about what it means to build a just society. And those are the lessons that I tried to focus on in this book, because those are truly universal lessons. Those are lessons that you, as the old advertisement used to say, you don't have to be Jewish to have the
Like
Torah.
the Torah, yeah.
Moshe,
Yes, Rabbi Dov Peretz-Elkins. Hello.
I just want to say that I've read several of the Parashat and was very inspired and enlightened. It was delightful, and I really look forward to continuing reading the rest of the book. And Yesher Koach, and I hope it sells way beyond your highest expectations.
God willing. Thank you very much. I will ask, speaking of sales, I will ask anybody who has or will buy the book on Amazon, please, please, please go on Amazon and give it a review. The more stars, the better, because the more reviews with the more stars, the more visibility, the more sales, the more the message gets out. The more the message gets out, God willing, the more we change the world for the better. Not to mention, the more money comes in, the more some very needy people here in Jerusalem will be helped by those revenues. Thank you, Rabbi Elkins. I thank you personally for the support that you gave me teaching Torah in your synagogue back in Princeton, New Jersey, and you and your amazing Rebbitzin, Miriam, the two of you, for your friendship throughout the years. And we're just looking forward, God willing, to when this is behind us and we can all sit together at the Shabbos table again.
Amen, amen.
Amen.
Moshe, can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Hi, Nick.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to coming over and buying my copy of your book in person soon. I was wondering, what is the place of role models in your book?
I want to answer that question carefully. So I want to ask you, the way I understand it is, maybe I understand it, maybe I don't understand the way you meant it. Who are the role models in the Torah?
So the way I meant it is that that the way that you've been talking about it, and the way that I've read and some have also really enjoyed in some of your Divrei Torah that you published and sent around, that you kind of really emphasize the complexity of the challenges that that the biblical characters are up against, and that's something that that Darius in his very moving words also mentioned, that we're seeing people who have the struggles we have as well, and we're reading about them and we're seeing how they dealt with them. And so something, a kind of a challenge for me personally, that is something that I've thought about over the years, is there's a kind of conflict between that and seeing characters who are like you, who are fighting your fights and sharing your struggles, and seeing them as role models to emulate. Okay. And I wondered how, and I think every one of us has to come up to negotiate this, because if people are challenged and wrestling, sometimes they're not the best people to emulate. And I just wondered how you deal with that.
So this is, thank you. This was a very key part of my whole approach in writing the book. There's a yeshiva that I've been very involved with here in Jerusalem since we got here. Unfortunately, with Corona, it's been very difficult for me to go. I had been going there one day every week and interacting, teaching and learning together, and just socializing with the young men there. It's a group of young men who, most of whom grew up here in very, very ultra-Orthodox homes, and for one reason or another, it didn't work out for them. And unfortunately, many of them not only can't go back to their yeshivas, a lot of them literally cannot go back to their own families, and they seek another community. And it's just a very moving experience to be there with these young men. But I remember early on in my experience with the yeshiva, sitting there, and one of them was saying to me, and he was burning up with, he was literally, I could see that he was in emotional agony over this. He was saying, Jacob, he lied to his own father. He tricked his brother. He stole from him. He stole from his father and from his brother, and then he ran away. And how am I supposed to emulate this person? I'm told that this is a great tzaddik, a great righteous man, and I have to be like him. I want to be like him. I want to be a thief and a liar. And he couldn't get over what had been beaten into him from the moment that he was old enough to read a book and the moment he was old enough to sit in a chair in a schoolroom, that these people are perfect and you have to be just like them. And when you read the book, it doesn't, as they say in the yeshivas, it doesn't stem. It just doesn't match. Okay. So my answer to him is, Jacob is a role model because he's got a lot of problems, because he does a lot of things wrong. And guess what? I don't know about you. I've done a lot of things wrong in my life. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. I still make mistakes. I said the wrong thing, or I didn't say the thing that I should have said. And, we all have this. And to deny that those same human traits are part of the makeup of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and of Sarah, and of Rachel, and Rivka, and Leah, and so on, to deny that, then what good is the book? Okay, this is the greatness, for example, of many of you know that I've for many years have been studying and also teaching Tanya, the book written by the Alter Rebbe, the first of the Rebbes of Chabad Lubavitch. And he has a very striking definition of what he calls the tzaddik, the righteous person. He says the righteous person is somebody that's created that way by God. You can never be that person, so forget it. A righteous person, God creates one in every generation because there has to be one in the generation to keep the world in existence. You can't be the righteous person, forget it. He does the Jewish world a great favor, because kids like my young friend, they have it beat into them from the moment that they can sit in yeshiva. You have to be a tzaddik. You have to be a righteous person, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Wait a minute. So like Abraham, who told everybody that, oh, she's not my wife, do whatever you want with her, she's my sister, it's okay. And Jacob, who lied to his father and who stole from his brother, that's okay. It doesn't make sense. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be a great literary scholar to just read the text and say, wow, these people do some things that like I'm not comfortable with. And so I think that actually the Torah Dafka is a tremendous role model if we read it as something that says, as Rav Steinsaltz talks about the concept of in Tanya, about the concept of the person that the book is written about, who's a person who has to struggle constantly between doing the right thing and not doing the right thing, about their impulses and what they know is the right thing to do, and not being controlled by their emotions and not being controlled by their impulses. And it's a constant struggle. And Rav Steinsaltz says, the person who's created a righteous person, who's created a tzaddik, is, that's wonderful, but it lacks, he says, it lacks the majesty of the struggle that common person goes through moment by moment. And so I want to give, as we say, I want to give chashivos. I want to give a real importance and real acknowledgement to each one of us in our own common humanity. That's where our own greatness can come from. And the Torah says to each one of us, look at what Jacob overcame. Look at what Joseph overcame. Look at Joseph, of all, right? Because at least God spoke to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God doesn't even speak to Joseph. But Joseph, look what he overcame. Look at the childhood that he had. Look at all the mistakes that his father made. Look at his brothers wanted to kill him. He was sold into slavery. He was thrown in a dungeon. He was set up. He was this, he was that. And look what he overcame. Okay? If he was a tzaddik, a righteous person, it was the work of a lifetime. And he doesn't achieve that, I think, until the very end of the book of Genesis. So the message is, you, no matter how low a level you view yourself as being relative to these people, look at what they had to go through. And I think that the Torah is not, as I said at the beginning, Na'aseh Adam, let's make a human being. You, dear reader, and me, the text, let's be able to relate to these people. And I think that's the role model piece that I think is critical. And it's so often missing from the way that traditional religious settings teach these texts. It goes to, Jewish education, don't get me started about how, Midrash becomes like the literal meaning of the text, right? Because otherwise it's too complicated. Otherwise you have to think about it and ask questions. And, that flies in the face of that organized part of organized religion. It's a challenge. But
Moshe, can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
And as a Christian, we spend most of our time studying sort of the forgiveness doctrine of Christ and Christianity. And I think part of it is because we don't know how to confront the inner demons within ourselves. And we view the Torah and the Old Testament as really as this book of scorn, as this book of you're not worthy, you're not following the rules, you're not doing the right things. And for the first time in my life, as someone who's been a Christian my whole life, I finally understood the Torah and the characters within the Old Testament as real human people, as not tzaddiks, but as people who struggle and have the same pitfalls that we do as regular people. So it was really, truly the first time I've ever really engaged in the Old Testament in a way that actually made sense to me, as opposed to just something that I can never attain or really is causing me great shame because I'm failing to live up to its doctrine.
Thank you. On that note, we're at an hour. So I would like to thank you all for coming. I would like to thank you for participating. I'd like to thank you, those of you who've spoken, for your comments and questions. And I would like to thank all of you who have bought and who will buy this life-changing book. And I'm very blessed, Darius, by your friendship, by having you as a friend, as a chosen brother whom I deeply love and cherish, and not to mention as a business partner who's doing a tremendous job, for which I thank you. Thank you all for joining us. God bless. and may the word spread.
Amen. Love you, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you, Abba.
You.
We love you, Baba Musa.
Hi.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for joining us. Bye. Okay.
Say goodbye. Say goodnight, Gracie.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
I'm leaving.